The Victorian era was rife with invention, innovation and design. Steam made the Industrial Revolution possible, and this miracle vapour would be used to power anything, from the smallest water pumps to the mighty railway engines that would move thousands of people every day. But there would be one engine class that would take Victorian ideas to a different level. But despite this being a railway channel, the story starts well away from the tracks in rural England. In the 1840s, steam engines were well established as the kings of motive power. The railway boom was in full swing, and companies were flocking away from the canal network to the rails as the preferred means of freight. But on the roads, the stagecoach was still the best way to travel. It wasn't too bad in the city, or even in most towns, but many parts of the road network in the countryside was nothing but mud tracks and cobblestone. As the farming community took advantage of these new machines that were afforded to help them to work, they found that moving them from place to place without rails, you would still need the tried and tested horsepower. Like everything, farm worker and inventor Thomas Aveling knew that the horse could only do so much. Like the railways, he wanted to streamline this service. He was working on a farm with a Clayton and Shuttleworth portable engine. He took a driving chain and attached it to the crankshaft of the engine and to the rear axle, making it a self-propelled machine. Believe it or not, this was the first ever traction engine. From this vital experiment, Aveling was able to refine it and create the first ever steamroller. He would later be called the father of the modern traction engine. In 1862, Aveling partnered with Thomas Porter to create the Aveling and Porter Traction Company. In 3 years, the first steam engines were rolling off the line, and by the turn of the century, the Aveling Company was the largest steam manufacturers for traction engines in the world. Back off the roads and on the rails, Aveling dabbled in several small shunting and tram locomotives. Like the traction engines, these were not built for passenger comfort or for mainline use. They were designed to be used out of sight in the various factory works around the country, shunting and moving stock. Their looks were unusual. They were basically traction engines on rails. They looked like traction engines, they worked like traction engines, and the only difference they had was the flange wheels, and amazingly, there's 5 of them preserved today. Works number 807 is the oldest engine on this list. It was made to be a shunter for the Oxford and Aylesbury tramroad. At a top speed of just 4 miles an hour, it was quickly deemed unsuitable for the busy railway's demands, so it was sold in 1894 for the Stewbrick and Tile Company and used to move material and finished products around the factory. The engine was an added bonus, as being a spare independent engine should any of the machinery lose power. When the brickworks closed during the Second World War, 807 was used to move a different type of material, ammo, and it did this until the end of the war. After the war, the engine was stored away until it was sold again, but this time the engine was on the footpath to preservation. The Industrial Locomotive Society took ownership of the engine, but London Transport agreed to hold the engine for safekeeping and even gave it a cosmetic makeover, and while a home was found for it. The engine now calls the London Transport Museum its home, where it remains to this day. Number 3567, or Sydenham, is the more traction engine than railway engine and has more power than 807. One of this engine's more defining features sits above the boiler. On a railway engine, you would expect this to be a dome, but this is in fact their cylinders. The cylinders power the twin axles via a series of gears, and water and coal is fed via an injector from an external rear-mounted tender. The engine worked for the Beadle brothers at the wharf in Kent. They were coal merchants, which was situated on the site of a failed public gardens and entertainment facility. The site was later owned by William Corey and Sons and worked there until the engine was sold to the Erith Oil Works. It didn't have far to travel, in fact the companies were next door neighbours. The engine was rebuilt and in work by the mid-1930s. In 1953, Erith Oil Company became British Oil and Cake Mills, but thanks to a modernisation, the engine was replaced by a diesel. Sydenham was stored away with no options. But an option came knocking. The Enfield Veteran and Vintage Vehicle Society took the engine on and transferred the ownership of the engine to the Quainton Railway Society. It arrived at the railway in 1969 following a short stay in storage. It was restored and worked for many years at the Chatham Dockyard and is currently in the waiting room for an overhaul. The third engine on this list is one of the more famous engines from the Aveling Company and the only one in active steam at the time of writing. 6158 or Cirrusbite got its name from the very thing it was moving. Cirrusbite is a form of concrete and the engine started life in the gypsum mines in 1929. The engine was purchased by Richard Garrett and Sons, where it worked as a shunter at the Leiston Works Railway. It was one of the few railways that still use horses for shunting and was a private line connecting its works to the Aldborough main line. When Cirrusbite came along, the horses were made redundant. Cirrusbite spent over 30 years hauling coal and iron from the main line to its works until it was replaced itself by a battery electric locomotive. The battery loco did not last long as the closure of the works in 1968 confirmed its scrapping. But the works were not forgotten. The majority of the complex was preserved as the Long Shop Museum, while Cirrusbite sat in the corner of a shed almost untouched. Luckily, its new owner was none other than Sir William McAlpine. Sir William returned the engine back to its roots, and in 2009 it steamed to life again at Leiston. The new owners, the Leiston Railway Trust, built 250 yards of track on the old track bed especially for Cirrusbite to use. It's regularly steamed, although it's not able to haul passengers due to the engine not having any vacuum braking. It's also taken holidays on various railways where its use of a shunter was invaluable. Number 8880 is one of two on this list that is solely in private hands, and it was built in 1917 and is known as a compound engine and was sold to Vickers Armstrong. In 1932 it was sold to the British Coal and Cake Mills. The same mills would merge and both 8880 and 3567 would meet. It was privately sold in preservation in 1966, where it was rebuilt, but it took over 30 years for the engine to run again. It was briefly based at the Buckingham Railway Centre before being moved to private property. It owns the unique title of being the only heritage steam engine to run in the COVID UK lockdown in April 2020, when owners David and Patricia Buck decided to take it for a spin on their own private line. Not a bad way to spend lockdown, really. The very last engine on this list is also the youngster of the group. Aveling Porter's 9449 looks the most likely to run on the roads. It has oversized rear wheels, giving the engine the best traction of the group, and carries the name Blue Circle. It's also the very last railway engine that Aveling and Porter would produce, and is the basis for Fergus, even going as far as giving the character the same jobs. The Blue Circle worked at the Sodland Works of Holborough Cement Company and had a long life helping create tons of cement. Its hard work earned it a spot in the preservation sector, and it was presented to the Bluebell Railway in 1964. The Bluebell restored the engine. However, like the others, the Bluebell felt the engine was not a good fit for its railway, and there was limited opportunity to let the engine shine. It was loaned and then sold to the Buckinghamshire Railway at Quainton. From there it was moved again to several preservation railways, but in 2018 it was decided that the locomotive be best put up for sale. COVID had a say and the engine was moved to several more railways before it ended up at Neem Valley. Luckily, the engine fitter at the railway took a shine to the engine and purchased it with a view to give the engine a complete overhaul. It is expected we will see the engine sometime in the next 10 years. As for the company, in 1919 Aveling and Porter decided to merge with the Agricultural and General Engineers combine. This was a conglomerate of several different companies, becoming a monopoly in general and road engineering. It was supposed to bring the best of the engineering powerhouses together, But very quickly, the burden of its central London headquarters was hitting the new company hard. Its lack of competition was its undoing, with a lack of innovation and misunderstanding of the current market, namely the innovation of combustion engines. It collapsed 13 years after it was formed. Aveling and Porter was thrown a lifeline and merged with Barthard and Perkins. Aveling Barthard is still going strong today and is a part of the Wordsworth Group, selling industrial vehicles and dumper trucks. For traction engines, the name Aveling and Porter is to them what Gresley and Stanier is to us. But Aveling was special in making one of the rare occasions where heritage fractions meet and would ultimately merge.